First, he claims that the Rambam teaches that a 3-year-old girl is capable of having willful intercourse with an adult, and that she is killed as a result. The Rambam here, however, is not teaching that a 3-year-old, especially those in his and our times, is mentally or even physically capable of willfully and intentionally partaking in intercourse with an adult. First, we must ask the question, why does the Rambam mention the specific age of 3 years and 1 day? The Rambam writes in a specific halachic terminology, or a specific line of legal terms and definitions of which are not found in conventional or non-halachic literature. He is specifically borrowing a term from the Gemara, or Babylonian Talmud, that discusses the ramifications of the hypothetical situation in which a girl of the age of 3 is betrothed through intercourse. We learn, however, as explained by Rav Gil's student in his article on the subject, of which I will leave in the description, that it is taught that a 3-year-old girl is incapable of having willful sex within the Gemara, and that the case is speaking of a hypothetical event in relation to the status of virginity, not a legal case which teaches that it is permissible to have sex with a 3-year-old, nor a case which teaches that a 3-year-old can willingly participate in intercourse. The reason for bringing such a precise hypothetical with such extreme or unusual circumstances is that Chazal, or the sages of the Talmud, wish to elucidate any matter or line of halachic questioning in each instance or circumstance of all legal matters. This was done to eliminate any possible disputations or misunderstanding among the people of Israel, so that a case would not fall into an irresolvable state or into obscure and unfounded reasoning. We see that the Gemara specifically forbids intercourse and marriage of any child, whether they are 3 years old or older, in many different places. For example, in Maseches Kiddushin, daf 41a, the following is said: a man may marry off his daughter when she is a nara, or a young woman. When she is a nara, yes. When she is a child, no. This supports the teaching of Rav, for Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, and there are those who say Rabbi Eliezer. It is forbidden for a man to marry off his daughter when she is a child until she grows up and says, I want to marry so-and-so. As well, we see the Gemara teaches that a betrothal or intercourse to a child delays the messianic redemption, which is a transgression. In Maseches Nida 13b, it is taught, those who play with tinoikos, which are prepubescent girls, delay the Messiah. Who are those who play with children? Those who betroth themselves to minor girls who are incapable of bearing children. We learn the same from Rashi on Kesubos daf 57b, commenting on the expression aval poskin. He says that marriage to a minor girl is prohibited. Various other halachic authorities, including the Rambam, hold the same. He teaches this in Hilchos Gerushin, the laws of divorce, where he says, Ein noshin esakotno. One cannot marry a minor. He teaches well in Isarei Biyo that a man cannot marry a minor who is not fit to give birth, citing the same halacha mentioned in Maseches Kiddushin above. We as well learn in the Gemara that a woman who is participating in sexual intercourse against her will is not held accountable, as it was not in her will to do so. Kesuvos daf 3b brings down this halacha through the example of the punishment of being forbidden from one's husband for participating in prohibited intercourse. As it says, and let the sages demand that in cases of coercion it is permitted to submit to violation. Rashi comments on this passage, citing Kesubos daf 51, that she, as a result of being under coercion, does not incur the punishment of being forbidden from her husband, and that she may submit to violation in order to save her life. Finally, we see the Rambam as well gives the following definition. We learn in Hilchos Nara Basula, the laws regarding a virgin maiden, what is considered seduction and what is considered rape. Seduction is an encounter she desired. Rape is when she has relations against her will. Any woman who has relations in the field is presumed to have been raped, and we treat such a case as a rape case until witnesses testify that she had relations of her own volition. And on this matter, we see the Rambam teaches that the 294th negative mitzvah, or a mitzvah to partake in a prohibition, is, quote, not to punish a rape victim in the case of rape, end quote. Now that we see the usage of the Gemara's specific terminology and definitions in precise hypotheticals, the Gemara's teaching on who can consent to marriage or betrothal, whether legally or illegally via intercourse outside a legal union, the Rambam's teaching on who is able to consent, on the legality of marriage to a minor, his definition of coerced intercourse or rape, and that a rape victim is not punished, we may conclude that he did not teach that a 3-year-old could consent to sex or betrothal. We must then ask the question, why does the Rambam mention a 3-year-old girl? As the shiur on the same chapter in the Rambam explains, the Rambam is citing a case where a non-Jewish woman would intentionally go out and have intercourse with a Jewish man and lead him astray into mortal sin.
See, with a non-Jewish woman, bein ktana bas shalosh shana, whether she is 3 years old, v'yem echad and up, bein gdela, or she's an adult woman over 12 or 12 and a half, bein pnuya, whether she is available, bein eshes ish or not, even if he was 9 years old, as we learned earlier again and again. That's the beginning when intimacy has an effect with a man, kivin shaba alakusis bizodain arezun ereges. Then the courts could possibly take her to court and try to apply capital punishment if there are witnesses, etc., who warned them, because the Jew ran into a problem due to this encounter. This is specified in the Torah, as it says with the Midianites, that these girls were sent out by the Midianite leaders to entrap the Jewish young men, as it says in the biblical story of Bilam.
The Rambam establishes here that she is put to death when she intentionally does so, not when unintentionally done, like in the case of rape as mentioned previously. The Rambam, due to the fact that he writes in the specific language of halacha, which makes use of a series of legal terminologies and categories to emulate a variety of different meanings and senses in relation to both judgment with the law and systematic learning of the law, and not in the simplistic language of non-halachic literature, which seeks to convey easily understood meanings without the system of categorization through phrases as used in halachic literature, utilizes the term, as found in the Gemara's discussion of an extreme circumstance, to add emphasis to the severity of the transgression that she has incurred, and not to reason that it is permissible to argue that a 3-year-old would intentionally participate in seduction of an Israelite man. Hence he cites the verse that says, "Execute any woman fit to know a man through lying with a male." This refers to an intentional action, not an unintentional one. He brings the case of the child to say that even if, for example, the one doing this intentionally was a child, the court would still carry out its punishment, as the child doing so intentionally would require the mental capacity and understanding of an adult to perform such a crime, and thus the transgression is incurred through an intentional sin, as the understanding of an adult requires the instinctive moral separation between what is good and what is bad. Yet, as we have already established, the Rambam teaches that a minor girl is not fit to know a man through betrothal or through intercourse, and as a result cannot consent to such an action, as by the standard of the Gemara, she is not matured and lacks the ability to do so. In conclusion of the matter, the Rambam does not punish a 3-year-old if one engages in intercourse with her, as she is physically incapable of consenting due to a lack of maturity, and that she thus cannot intentionally carry out such an act. Rather, the Rambam uses Chazal's method of bringing precise cases to elucidate even the most nuanced of matters, to establish the severity of the sin within the chapter, and not to reason that this is plausible or possible that a 3-year-old would do such a thing. One sees a common theme with Muslim missionaries, that they will consistently take the literature of Judaism completely out of context for slanderous purposes, proceeding to erase all notion of nuance found within the precise and complex wording of the sages, in order to make Judaism appear as something that it is not. Then, these same missionaries pretend as if they are intellectually honest and will find every reason to avoid confrontation or acceptance of correction to their purposefully woven lie. They will not seek to bring people into the fold of the truth, but rather to trick ignorant people with emotionally charged garbage instead of careful observation of the Jewish faith and its principles. What is most ironic is that they complain about Christian polemicists telling mistruths about their scriptures and legal teachings through the same method of erasing nuance from a nuanced matter, and targeting the ignorant Muslim for his lack of knowledge instead of representing Islam correctly and disputing its teaching in an honest, truthful, and proper manner. They are in their very essence hypocrites, and they are cursed according to their own verses as well as that of the Torah. They partake in such sophistry and ignorance of context because they cannot actually refute our faith, rather they may only deceive and confuse. He then claims in this tweet that because many Lubavitchers believe that the last Lubavitcher Rebbe is the Mashiach, that therefore it means that we must accept that Jesus can come back and a messianic second coming may occur. What Judaism Unveiled is well aware of but purposefully negates is that the majority of Klal Yisrael considers the one who says that the Rebbe is the Mashiach is exceedingly mistaken, and that there cannot be a second coming. There are many other heretical practices and statements which come along with the profession that the Rebbe is the Mashiach, and their notion of a second coming is false and not found anywhere within Judaism. This is further evidence for the dishonesty of Muslim missionaries who appeal to heretical sects in order to deceive the uneducated. Should we appeal to those who say that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad is the Mahdi for Islamic doctrine? Absolutely not. He then claims that to look at someone while they are using the restroom and to interact with them or to hide under the bed to observe the sexual practices of one's teacher is permissible according to Chazal. First and foremost, the Gemara does not say that. The Rabbanim interacted with each other when in the bathroom. Interaction in the bathroom is halachically prohibited, and modesty is required when present within the bathroom. The Gemara merely says that at one time, two Rabbanim were in the bathroom with each other, and that they learned halachas from each other, not that they had learned the halachas from either speaking or directly looking at each other while in the bathroom, but that they had merely learned. The same sages forbid interaction and forced modesty while in the restroom, as we see in the Shulchan Aruch. I will post a halachic summary of the prohibition in the description. But regarding Rav Kahana being under his teacher's bed during intercourse, this is not called a permissible action, as this liar claims, and we see that in the exact same matter, he rebukes Rav Kahana for doing so. The same event as recounted in Brachas is recounted in Chagiga 5b, where Rabbi says, quote, Kahana, leave as this is not proper conduct, end quote. So no, we do not see that the Gemara or Chazal teach that it is permissible to nullify your modesty in this matter. Once again, the Muslim missionary desperately tries to misrepresent Judaism by appealing to the emotional sensibilities of those unlearned in Judaism. Simply put, he is trying to make a mockery of our faith by trying to make it seem strange or unusual, or to accuse our Rabbanim of doing lewd things when they do not. Shall we do the same to the Ahadith, where it is narrated in Al-Bukhari that Moses, God forbid, indecently exposed himself in a public area, and that the children of Israel bore witness to his scrotal hernia, and began admiring his body as a result? Note that in this narration, there is no mention of any attempt to preserve his modesty, instead of impulsively running out in the open after a stone with his clothing. Sunni Muslims consider this event a positive, not negative occurrence, as they argue through this a rumor was cleared up about Moses' body being imperfect. Yet somehow they ignore the entire portion about where the people of Israel, God forbid, look at his genital region and how he willingly indecently exposed himself to the public eye. While we as Jews would consider this narration false and blasphemous, and believe me, we do, we will not argue that all of a sudden this makes their faith or religion factually incorrect, and we wouldn't appeal to the emotional sensibilities of the modern day to try and make a mockery of the religion of Islam, or to make it seem strange in order to discourage proper representation of said faith. We also would not make a similar statement to his own, that the Sahaba then thought it is permissible to expose yourself and have people look upon your genital area to dispel myths about your body, as that claim would be manifestly false from what we learn in their jurisprudence. Judaism Unveiled then says that during Purim, sins become mitzvahs, yet not a single religious source says this. This comes from the narration of a secular Israeli documentary on Purim. He is an idiot. He also suggests that the killing of Haman, his sons, and his supporters was immoral by calling it, quote, brutal and merciless. The reason why Haman and his sons were killed, as well as his supporters, was because he actively sought to destroy the Jewish people violently, as we learn in Esther 3 that he wanted to destroy all Jews. Those who supported Haman and his attempt to do so were killed in retaliation under the order of the king of Persia at the time, Ahasuerus. Ironically enough, the sons of his who did not support Haman and repented actually began a long line of Torah learning and great loftiness among the Jewish people, as we learn in Gittin 57b and Sanhedrin 96b. According to Judaism Unveiled, self-defense against people who want to kill every single last Jew is immoral and unjustified. He then claims that the Zohar HaKadosh says that Jewish souls are inherently supernatural, whereas Gentile souls are inherently animal-like and demonic. The Zohar HaKadosh doesn't say this. The Zohar HaKadosh firstly establishes that the soul of Israel is holy, while the souls of the nations are unholy. The Zohar HaKadosh doesn't say this because of the inherent Jewishness of the Jewish soul, nor because of the inherent non-Jewishness of a Gentile soul, but because of the aspects of the two. A Jewish soul is called that of the Nefesh Chaya, the living soul, because of the fact that it obeys God and His Word and acts piously. A Jewish soul that does not do so is actually cut off from the category of a living soul, and is actually considered among the idolatrous nations, as we learn the Rambam's Hilchos Shabbos, chapter 30, halacha 15, and becomes like that of an animal, as it acts like an animal when it partakes in idolatry. The soul of a Gentile, however, is not inherently animalistic, as we learn in the Peidish, the commentary of the Taisvis Yom Tov on Pirkei Avos 3:14. Gentiles are created in the transcendent and incorporeal image of God. We learn in Masechus Shabbos 89a that the only reason why hatred for the nations exists is because of the fact that they did not accept the Torah and indulged in idolatry. As it says, quote, and hatred descended there for the nations of the world, end quote. Rashi adds, hatred for the nations, because they did not accept the Torah. This same concept is repeated in Masechus Sanhedrin, Daf 59, where it says that the prohibition of idolatry was repeated at Sinai for the sons of Noah because they engaged in idol worship and God punished them for it, meaning that any criticism or hatred expressed for the nations of the world is seldom for the idol worship of which they perform. The Talmud expresses extreme compassion for a Gentile who is repentant and accepts the Noahide laws and the full truth of the Torah. As Rav Mizrahi and Rav Chaim explain.
שימו לב, מעיד אני עלי שמיים וארץ, שבן איש בן אישה, בן עבד בבן שפחה, ואפילו נוכרי לא משנה מי, הכל לפי מעשיו, כך שורה עליו רוח הקודש. אז לבוא ולהגיד שאתם מציגים את התורה שבעל פה כגזענית, התורה שבעל פה באה ומסבירה את התורה שבכתב.
This is what it says. Kohanecha ilbeshu tzedek. We say in the prayers, we say this pasuk. Kohanecha ilbeshu tzedek. Who is Kohanecha ilbeshu tzedek? We have to understand. We say it a million times in our lifetime and we don't understand. They say, the Rambam writes, and the Midrash writes, Elu Chassidei umot haolam. Those are the righteous goyim from all over the world. That they are like Kohanim to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu loved these goyim like they are Kohen. How we love the Kohen, we give him all kinds of benefits, right? They are כמו Kohanim LaKadosh Baruch Hu בעולם הזה, in this world. ובתנא דבי אליהו, there's a famous book, תנא דבי אליהו, it's based on what Eliyahu Hanavi told us some of the secrets. פרק ט', chapter 9, this is what it says. מעיד אני עלי שמיים וארץ. I put heaven and earth to be my witness. That whether a Jew, whether it's a goy, whether it's a man, whether it's a woman, whether it's a male slave, whether it's a female slave, it's all depend on what your actions are and nothing else. No discrimination whatsoever. You understand? So the next time you look at Ahmed or Chris or Bruce Lee or Fatma, don't underestimate them so fast. They may be more righteous than you. They may be more faithful to God than us.
Hence we see that the Gemara does not hold any hatred for a non-Jew based on race or ethnicity or heritage, and expresses love for the nations of the world based off of their merits. Here we see that he claims that, quote, Jews usually deny that the Talmud mentions Jesus, and that in secret, Jews curse Jesus and reveal that he is in reality within the Gemara. Judaism Unveiled, because he is an anti-Semite, accuses Jewish people in general of lying about our positions solely because of the fact that we are Jews, and then practices the fallacy of guilt by association. The position of whether or not Jesus is within the Talmud is at a dispute, as we see that many, such as the Maharal of Prague, Alav Shalom, held that Jesus was mentioned in the Gemara, whereas, for example, many of the Taisvis, such as Rav Nosson Paris, held that this was a different Jesus. The reasons for holding that the Gemara mentions a different Jesus is because the biographical dates and details in the Gemara of Jesus are starkly different to those given in the New Testament or by Christian sources. The Jesus mentioned in the Gemara is not mentioned as being killed via crucifixion, but he is mentioned to have died by stoning. Secondly, it mentions that he was a student of Yoshua ben Prachia and died 80 years before the Jesus of the New Testament. Nowhere in the Gemara does it say that this Jesus claimed to be God or the Messiah. The title Notzri, which is commonly translated as Nazarene, is actually given to Jesus because of his relation to Nebuchadnezzar, who possesses the same last three letters of his name as that of the title given to Jesus in the Gemara. Regardless, imagine if I said that, quote, Muslims secretly hate Christians in private and wish for them to be destroyed, and only pretend to want peace in public. Muslim missionaries like Judaism Unveiled would immediately accuse me of being some sort of xenophobe and even a racist for suggesting such a thing, even though we have seen clip after clip of Muslim scholars professing a hatred for Christian civilization. He then states that the Mechilta of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai says that one may forcefully make their slave accept Judaism. The issue is that according to the same halacha which dictates so, one must be freed if he accepts Judaism. As we learn the Shulchan Aruch, Yeridea, there is no authority of Hebrew slaves except in the era of which the Jubilee was observed. The halacha that outside of the Jubilee year, no Hebrew slave, which includes that of the mixed multitude of non-Jews who crossed over into Israel with the Israelites themselves, may be owned, is established by the prophet Yirmiyoh or Jeremiah, where he says that all must release their slaves, and none may hold his Jewish brother as a slave. The Rambam also establishes that a slave may be released if his master has him put on tefillin, or has him read 3 verses of the Torah in the presence of the public, in his Hilchos Avadim, the laws of slaves, something of which only one under the covenant can do. Hence we see that if a slave, while in bondage, accepts upon himself the obligation of Judaism, he must be set free. Once a slave is set free, he is completely relinquished from bondage and from the possession over him that was held by his master, and is considered completely as a free man. Hence the Mechilta grants slaves a further right to freedom, as opposed to further bondage. His claim about Rabbi Yirmiyoh in the Gemara has already been addressed in another video. Check the description for the link. He then claims that Rav Shela here makes a, quote, racist remark and then kills a Gentile while twisting a verse in the Torah. We've already established that the Gemara does not judge on a racial basis whatsoever, and that this purposefully emotional statement is only made by missionaries to try and manipulate uneducated people into accepting their libelous statements about Judaism. Regarding the action itself, as someone has already pointed out for me in his replies, this action was done in self-defense, as the Babylonian Persians would execute Jews for even a slight criticism. In fact, the Babylonian Persians participated in many massacres of the Jewish people during the Second Babylonian exile and were generally merciless in their persecution of the Jews of Babylon. Judaism Unveiled admits that Rav Shela did this in complete self-defense, but he then claims that he is twisting the Torah as, quote, the context of the verse is about a burglar. Rav Shela here is not reinterpreting a verse to fit his own needs, nor is he even citing his own Kiddush, or his own interpretation of the verse. Rather, he is citing sages previous to him. As we learn in Sanhedrin Daf 72, the verse is applied to a burglar who is coming to murder you and take your wealth. Quote, the sages taught, there shall not be bloodshed on his account, if the sun is risen upon him. This is a citation of Exodus 22, verses 1-2. But did the sun rise only upon him? Rather, it is clear to you, as the sun, that he is not coming to you in peace, i.e., he is coming to kill you. Kill him. Hence, we see that the verse in of itself also applies to self-defense from a rodef, or a pursuer, i.e., one who is actively in the process of causing a life to be taken, and not just a burglar, as the burglar, in this case, is of the same status as a rodef due to his intention to kill. This was a poor attempt by Judaism Unveiled to rip the Gemara out of context and to even reinterpret the context of a verse to fit his narrative, of which he then accuses the sages of doing so by erasing nuance and precision from the text of the Talmud and then generalizing. It is at this point we should ask ourselves about whether or not it is a sin to lie in the religion of Sunni Islam, as it appears that their missionaries do so constantly, even though the Quran and Sunnah demand that they do not do so. He then claims that rabbis have a difficult time resolving genocidal passages in the Torah. The subject of destroying nations in the Torah, prophets, and writings is lengthy and should be saved for another video. In the meantime, I would like to point out that the Chassidim Sefer establishes the nuance regarding the fate and judgment of the underaged in his commentary on the events of Numbers 31 and provides fine insight into the matter, including the actual meaning of the word taf as used within the chapter. We do see as well that many from those civilizations from previous wars had actually repented and joined the nation of Israel, including the men, such as in the second book of Samuel, where we see that there were those among Saul's army who were descended from Amalekites. See the passage which says, Ben ish ger Amaleki anoichi, and Amaleki anoichi, or I am the son of an Amalekite convert, and I am an Amalekite. However, Judaism Unveiled has no room to object to the Torah's passages regarding the matter, as his very own religion and religious authorities affirm the killing of youths as entirely immoral. In Sunan an-Nasa'i, we read the following report. Atiyah said, I was among the prisoners of the Qurayza. We were examined, and whoever had grown hair, that being pubic hair, was killed, and whoever had not grown hair was allowed to live and was not killed. This is a discussion of the killing of the Jewish tribe of the Banu Qurayza. Here we see that the narration elucidates that those who had grown visible pubic hair were killed among the sons of Qurayza, as authorized by Muhammad to his companions. Keep in mind, many children even today, especially those of Middle Eastern backgrounds, have a genetic predisposition to growing body hair at an early age, meaning children as young as 9 or 10, and possibly even younger, would have been killed intentionally by Muhammad's companions according to the Sunni Ahadith corpus. This is further affirmed by the fact that, according to the biographical information presented to us by Sunnis regarding the age of consummation of Muhammad's wife, Aisha, is that of 9 years old, meaning that she had reached puberty at that point, and according to Sunni jurisprudence, therefore eligible for intercourse. Hence we see that younger children reaching puberty and growing body hair would not have been uncommon whatsoever. One of the most renowned Salafi religious authorities in our time, Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen, had affirmed that it was morally just to kill civilian women and children during warfare.
ولا شيء فيه. من اعتدى عليكم فاعتدوا عليه بمثل ما اعتدى عليكم. أي العدل؟ أبدا ما يفرق هذا. هم قتلوا النساء نقتل النساء. هذا هو العدل. ليس العدل أن نقول إذا قتلوا نساءنا ما نقتل نساءكم، لأن هذا لاحظ أن هذا يؤثر عليهم تأثيرا عظيما. هم قتلوا نساء نقتل نساء.
Hence we see that Judaism Unveiled yet again falls into hypocrisy and deceit and makes emotional arguments instead of objective ones. Judaism Unveiled a few months ago uploaded a video with the title exclaiming that, quote, Jews worship the moon. I had already confronted him on this, so I will post the screenshots of our conversation in the description below with sources that were not included in the screenshots of which I took. Just to note, he did not respond to the answers I gave him as provided in the photos. He then claims here that Maseches Derech Eretz teaches that the Messiah has already been raised into heaven. He does so to imply that the sages taught a messianic second coming like his religion does. The fact of the matter is that this is not teaching that a second coming will occur. What the sugya is referring to is that the Messiah's soul is pre-existent and currently in heaven, waiting to descend upon the earth. Not that it has already descended and then was raised back into heaven. We learn in Maseches Pesachim that 7 things were created before the world was created, one of them being the name of the Messiah. We also see in the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov that the Messiah is currently awaiting his descent onto the earth from his chamber in the Garden of Eden. Here he proclaims that Avos DeRabbi Nosson is a work of the 9th century and that it plagiarized a hadith from Musnad ibn Ahmad ibn Hanbal. I have already written an argument against such a claim and one for the authenticity of the Avos DeRabbi Nosson, which I will provide in the description. He claims that because, quote, manuscripts appear no earlier than the 9th century, that then means that the Avos DeRabbi Nosson did not exist previous to that point. Yet this is fallacious, and his stupidity is inspired by secular academics, not observation of the transmission of the Avos. We have a specific method in authenticating the various Sifrei Kodesh that are in our hands today via principles of transmission, pathways of reception, and other matters of which works come down to us. He does not appeal to this whatsoever. Instead, like a hypocrite, he uses the already refuted secular method of historiography, something of which his own liturgy method or Islamic method of transmission and biographical information rejects. An old piece of paper means nothing. The earliest manuscript in our hands for the works of Aristotle is from the 11th century, yet that does not mean we do not know whether or not these works came from his hand. We know these works emerged from his hand because we have a succinct exegetical tradition regarding the works of Aristotle that have come down to us from the various schools of antiquity. Besides, it is not the nature of the Midrashim to copy from Islamic literature, with exception to interpolations found in unprofessionally produced recensions, such as that of Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, where it mentions Fatima and Aisha, 2 women related to Muhammad, despite being authored by Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus in the late 1st century. However, we know that these are interpolations from a private editor into the original text, as the Radal's recension, which is far older, unlike the weaker other recension, possesses a known pathway of transmission, gives the names Fatuma and Eifa, which are of similar spelling, but not the same names. Fatuma means aged, like aged wine, and Eifa is a standard of measurement. This is much more in line with the agadic nature of Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, which utilizes allegorical narrations as a medium of Torah learning. Hence we see another example of the authentic nature of Chazal's literature preserved and lacking in fabrication. As mentioned previously, it is not the nature of the Midrashim to draw inspiration from Islamic writers on account of their pre-Islamic nature. In fact, it is much more the nature of Sunni Ahadith to plagiarize Jewish literature. This is demonstrated in a paper I wrote in the name of a group of Shia friends of mine, of which I will provide as well in the description. His claim regarding the validity of the principle of the unchanging law possesses more content of which should be examined in a separate video. Once this video is complete, I will begin work on it. His claim about the Radak admitting the Torah was changed and that there is a textual error in the Bible have already been addressed in another video, of which I will provide in the description. I have also already made a video disproving his attempt to refute the Torah's chain, of which will also be provided in the description. He then claims here that the Gemara reinterprets a verse in Kings to say that Solomon wished to build idols but didn't actually do so. Judaism Unveiled is so unbelievably dishonest that he literally does not read the very next statement in the Gemara. The very next statement says, but now there is the verse, quote, then did Joshua build an altar to the Lord God. Does this mean that Joshua sought to build it and he did not build it? Rather, he built it. Here too, referring to Solomon, he built it, end quote. Secondly, the Gemara is not reinterpreting a verse, but rather pointing out a grammatical aspect of the verse that acts as the hypothetical case in the syntax of the Hebrew language. Due to the verse's grammar, the text could be conveying that Solomon did not build the idols, rather that he wished to. Hence it may be read as would. Yet, as already established, the Gemara explains that he indeed built the idols. Rashi further elaborates on this matter of the grammatical hypothetical case in the Hebrew language in his commentary on Exodus 15. He then claims that the Chachomim read the text of the scripture in Megillah 25b differently because of its vulgarity. His implication is that the sages held that the text was, quote, impure or defective. The context of the daf is a discussion among the sages regarding the public systematic reading of the Tanakh in the liturgical Parsha and Haftorah cycle. The reading is changed orally to preserve tranquility and the intention of prayer during the liturgy, and to not disrupt the peaceful state of the believing people during the liturgy, so that they may concentrate on worship of God. Rather, the writ itself is meant for idolaters or those in mortal sin who are forbidden from entering into a synagogue in the first place to be rebuked and struck with fear of God at the knowledge of these verses, so that they may wish to avoid incurring the divine wrath and be led into repentance. Once again, this Sunni apologist fails to recognize nuance and instead turns to petty insults and apparent self-made interpretation to criticize the true faith. Afterwards, he says the Gemara does not prophesize of the Holocaust in Megillah 14a. His first citation is from a well-known heretic, Joseph Kolakowski, showing that Judaism Unveiled fails to do actually legitimate research. Instead, he grasps desperately at the result most available to him. Kolakowski's inference is regardless unfounded that we shouldn't read Yirmiyoh as in reference to Germany itself because the Vilna Gaon doesn't comment on the name given in the verse. First and foremost, the Gemara establishes Edom here as a reference to Rome, and speaks of the 365 princes of Germania. This is reminiscent of the union of Germanic tribes against Rome, with each of the heads of the various Roman pagan clans uniting under a series of confederacies to conquer the city. Regardless, Rashi, who preceded the Vilna Gaon by many generations, establishes that this Germany is in fact the Holy Roman Empire, which was located in what is now the modern state of Germany, meaning Joseph's opinion doesn't matter. Rav Aryeh Leib Feinstein supports the idea that it is in reference to Germany and doesn't deny the link between the prophecy and the Holocaust. Repetition of prophecy is established within each generation of the world, the proof that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted, he could allow Germany to destroy the entire world is no further proven than with the events of the Holocaust. Were Germany united with the Axis powers together to cause millions around the world to die via war, disease, famine, and genocide? Rav Reuven establishes as well in a clip that I will leave in the description an even further correlation between the prophecy given in the Gemara and the Holocaust itself. It's ironic how much this self-proclaimed polemicist must grasp at straws and make empty statements in order to deceive simpletons on the internet. He posts a clip of the Lubavitcher Rebbe saying that God gave the power to the Jewish people to win over God himself, and that, quote, a Jew is likened to God. The Lubavitcher Rebbe here speaks in the complex language of mysticism, not in the language of simplicity or apparentism, which is what Judaism Unveiled, the Muslim David would have you believe. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was a normative Orthodox Jew and held by the 13 principles of faith, meaning that he, like the rest of the Jewish people, held that God is not truly won over, nor that a Jew is truly like the self of God, as God's essence is entirely unlike his creation. Rather, the Lubavitcher Rebbe is speaking of the matter of the pious Jew being a complete emanation of divinity due to his obedience of Torah and submission to the divine will. His reference to the Gemara, or the Avon of Achnai, is a narration about God testing the Sanhedrin, or the high court of the Jewish people, to see whether or not they deviate from the system of judgment given to the Jewish people by Moses at Sinai. He tested them by allowing various miracles to be performed which would mystify a weak mind, including the revelation of the transcendent divine voice. However, the Jewish people are told not to deviate from the Mosaic system of jurisprudence either to the left or to the right, lest he be put to death by divine law, as is established in Deuteronomy 17. Hence the sages sitting on the Sanhedrin did not deviate either to the left or to the right, and only heeded that which was within the bounds of the system of judgment given by God at Sinai. This is why the Gemara remarks specifically that God, quote, smiled, and then uttered the phrase through the divine voice, showing that he was pleased with their response to the words of the divine voice. It is not to say that God was truly won over, but rather that the sages remained in submission and succeeded in the testing of their hearts. Their, quote, winning over was in reference to their lack of deviation from the precepts of the Torah, and not heeding the miraculous occurrences in place of that which was given to Moses at Sinai, even if they are done with the divine voice. This shows their faithfulness to the divine decree. The Lubavitcher Rebbe references this portion of the Gemara to establish that the Jewish people, through observation of Torah, fully uncover the divine light and make it known to the mind of creation. Hence, even the lesser revealed form of the divine voice, which can be heard by those who aren't prophets, and as well by those who are spiritually low, whereas a divine voice is further revealed to the prophets in a way not known to us, is drawn back so that God's light may be emanated even further through the service of the Jewish people. Not that there is any deficiency in that which is divine, rather the divine works through the creation and the beloved servants. The idea that God revealing himself through his servants, and that his servants must do all they can to imitate him as he is perfect, is known as imitato Dei, or the imitation of the divine, and finds its place in the great ascent of mystical thought. It is only done through the greatest form of nullifying oneself to God and making himself as nothing before him, so that he may be a vessel in which nothing but divine light shines through to the world. It is as well discussed in the Torah itself in Exodus 7:1, where God says, I have made you a god to Pharaoh, as well in Psalms 82, where David says, you are gods, sons of the Most High. This is as well discussed by the Lubavitcher Rebbe in his Sichos on what it means for a servant of God to be, in a sense, divinized. The divinization is not to say that the creation is the same as God, or even like God himself truly, or that he is some sort of demigod or new deity, God forbid, but that through him God emanates the knowledge of himself to the world, allowing for the world to become closer to God through the same imitation of the divine. The pious believer himself is of course not God and a mere creation. He then claims that the words Ribono Shel Olam only come before a quotation of a verse from the written scripture. In reality, Judaism Unveiled is simply stupid. He has no actual evidence to suggest that the phrase can only come before a verse from the written scripture. No, this excerpt from the Yalkut does not even point to anything of the sort. That is from his own speculation. There are plenty of times in the Gemara that the phrase Ribono Shel Olam is used in reference to the words of God which do not originate within the written Torah. For example, Moshe Rabbeinu's discussion regarding Rabbi Akiva, a man who lived over 1,000 years after the Torah was given in Menachos 29b, where God speaks to Moses regarding the present event after the phrase, quote, Master of the Universe is given. Brachos 55a is the same, so is Bereshis Rabbah 110, Devarim Rabbah 2.1, and Shir Hashirim Rabbah 2.9. The sages will constantly quote the orally transmitted divine statements that are given to us from the mouths of the prophets and through their disciples in this manner, as has already been proven. The source for this specific quote is found in the Mishnah itself. This is even a commonplace practice found in the Ahadith, where Muhammad quotes Allah as saying, May my mercy precede my wrath, in word-for-word quotation of the Babylonian Talmud, ironically enough. The words, May my mercy precede my wrath, appear nowhere in the Quran. This concludes a series of refutations to his statements, as upon the recording of this video, there have been no others that he has released so far to the public. I only ask that one ponder, what was his motivation in attempting to spread such lies to vulnerable Jewish people when we have not provoked him into doing so? He is a Muslim missionary, or da'i, and we see that, for the longest of time, the current du'at in the West focused on attacking Christianity due to the fact that Protestant missionaries were attempting to target irreligious Muslims into rejecting Islam. Yet there has never been any movement among Jews to encourage the rejection of Islam among irreligious or uneducated Muslims, and as a result he is no different from the unprovoked Protestant missionary. He is one and the same as missionary organizations around the world who seek to convert Jews to their religion due to some strange psychological obsession with our people. We only ask to be left alone and to teach the true faith amongst ourselves. Yet because the nations of the world cannot honor this, we will defend ourselves and the truth of our faith. There is no reason to believe in the religion of Sunni Islam, much less what this missionary says. Hashem bikalala sayvenu v'yigal Yisrael.